The following is a Cartoonerific Studios presentation.
Welcome to Cartoon Fun, it's Cartoonerific. Yeah! It's Cartoonerific. Cartoonerific. It's Cartoonerific. With your host Brian Mitchell.
Well, now, you are listening to the Cartoonerific podcast, Classic Animated Cartoons. I am Brian Mitchell, and I am your host. Last week on the podcast, we had on a wonderful animator, brilliant talent. You've been enjoying his work for years. It's James Lopez. We had part one of our podcast uploaded last Friday, and guess what? Today we're going to have part two. And instead of babbling a whole bunch, we're just going to get right to it. So here it is. Here is part two of our wonderful interview with Mr. James Lopez. Please sit back and enjoy.
Right. So, yeah, it was definitely founded by Disney, and they do give a lot of money. As a matter of fact, to kind of add to that is, what was it, like in around 2011 or so?
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I had came back to Disney after a hiatus to work on Princess and the Frog, and after Princess and the Frog was done, they kept us around. And I remember, I think the recruiter came by and said, "Hey, listen, Disney just got a bunch of money from Roy Disney and his estate." I think this might have been it was around, when did he pass away?
The early 2000s, I'm going to say.
Okay, yeah.
I know he's still around 2001. Yeah, so maybe a couple of years after that. He was around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, either way, CalArt's got a big influx of money. And I kind of remember hearing something to the effect of, like, they wanted it. Roy was big on hand-drawn animation. Like, he wanted it to go to CalArts, specifically to the character animation department.
Wow.
And to really foster hand-drawn animation. And they asked us if any of us would be interested in teaching there at the time. And so, I volunteered, but I also got paid,
Right.
So I would go up there twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And I taught there for 3 years. I taught third year animation.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a class size of about 70 students. So
wow.
I would 35 on Tuesday and 35 and another 35 on Thursday. These were huge classes, and
sure.
And they really wanted to crack down. And it was actually a required class. They had to take was 2D animation. So it wasn't like an elective thing. They had to be there, and very few of them really wanted to do 2D animation. Literally, you're talking about 2 or 3 out of 70.
Wow, wow, yeah.
Everybody else wanted to do computer visual development, character design, or storyboard. And I get that. It's like there really wasn't much of a business, to do 2D, right? I mean,
it's still existing. It's just it's kind of, I don't want to say it's on life support. It seems like the Europeans have taken over with the 2D animation, and we're stuck with the other stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go back a little bit. So you were picked up by Bluth you went back to work for Bluth.
Yeah. I went to Ireland for a short time, and
right. So you were focusing on story at that point?
Yeah. Yeah. I was. They had again, very much like LA. They put their storyboard artists down the road from the main studio. It was this little tiny warehouse place with some offices that was probably about a mile from the main studio.
Why? Why'd they do that? Do you know?
I don't know. I guess I think maybe it was a little bit just to keep some distance, like so that people wouldn't be, coming in and seeing what was going on. You know what I mean? Like what was
Right.
coming down the road, and and
Right.
and then Don could retreat to his story, land, like
Yeah.
without having to worry about, people coming into him and, hey, it was like maybe his like little getaway. But I worked with a really nice group of people. The Zondags were really cool.
Right.
They were younger board artists back then. I worked with Dave Getz, and but I also worked with a gentleman, Roland Wilson,
That's right.
who was a caricaturist for what was it, for Playboy, and what was the other New York, the New
The New
Yorker, I
Yorker.
think.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a great caricaturist, so he knew about visual storytelling, and he was a great guy to hang out with, and
Right.
just it was just great. It was like, yeah.
Yeah. So how long were you there doing that?
Well, it wasn't very long. It was only a couple of months, and again, I think I was only 19 at the time, and to be honest, I kind of got a bit homesick, and kind of wanted to go back, and I also realized too that maybe story wasn't exactly for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean,
Hmm.
and so I had already, before I left, the what is it, the Rover Dangerfield production. A lot of people that I knew were working on Rover Dangerfield at the time, because that was starting up around
Right.
that time, and they found out I was going to Ireland, and they said, "Well, hey James, if you don't like it over there, if you don't, you're always welcome to work on our film if you want to come back." So I had this like opening there,
Right.
and once I was getting homesick, I called back, and I said, "Hey, if I came back, could I work on that Rover Dangerfield movie?" And they're like, "Yeah, yeah, come on over." And so I
Right.
did, and
Right.
I kind of, I had a really great time at Bluth there, and I don't know why. There was just something different about like the Rover Dangerfield thing, that I was following energy. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
was really
There was a
energy.
lot of energy over there.
Yeah,
Because I was called up. I'm trying to think who called me. I think it was Bruce Smith called me up.
yeah,
And he said, "Why don't you come? Why don't you check it out? Come over here, check it out." Not,
yeah.
not. You were offering you a job. They wanted me to kind of see what was going on,
Oh, I see.
and yeah, they were enticing me. They were trying to get
Oh,
me
okay.
over. So I went over there, checked it out. It looked like fun, but I left Bluth. I went to Warner Brothers, and so it
Oh,
was So I couldn't do that. I had a friend over at Warner Brothers, and he brought me over. He got me a good salary over there, and then and so if I'd done that, I probably would have burned a bridge, and I didn't want to do
yeah,
that. But
yeah.
it but
That
but it
that
looked
was.
like fun. It looked like a fun place to work. Hyperion,
Yeah,
Glendale.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That was a great place actually, and Tom Wilhite, he was great.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and I had a great time on that. I learned a lot. I mean, gosh, I mean, they really threw me into the deep end, and
What'd you do?
um,
What were you doing over there?
I was animating, and I was at first an assistant animator,
Mm-hmm.
which is different than an animation assistant. It just meant, right, that you just weren't expected to do as much animation as a
A
regular
journeyman.
animator. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's
Yeah.
the footage quotas were less, and you got paid less.
Right.
Quickly, like within doing a shot or two, I got promoted, and they said, "Okay, we're going to make you a full animator. We're going to give you a raise, but of course, this means you got to produce more." And the shots that they gave me were like, oh God! Now that I look back on it now, how insane was it? They gave me they gave me this close up of the female lead
Right.
in the
Yeah.
most pivotal scene of the film, where Rodney has to ask for her forgiveness for being such a douche.
Right.
Uh, and it and she was on screen the whole time for like 50 feet. It was like a 50-foot shot. Like,
Right. That's a little over half a minute, folks. Just
yeah. And
Yeah.
I had just started animating. How am I going to keep that alive for half, for a minute? I'm like, what are you guys doing? But
Right.
they believed in me, and I somehow ended up pulling it off.
Right.
Um, yeah.
Who did you report to? Were there any people that you could like bring it to and talk
Well,
to them
because
about it?
yeah, because I was mostly working with Bruce Smith. I was working with him on
Mhm.
his unit because they divided the movie up into sequences, and each directing animator had their own sequence.
Right.
So I was kind of like Bruce's guy,
Yeah.
So because I think
Very talented animator.
yeah, because I
Yeah.
met him at Bluth, and I think he was probably the one that told me about Rover Dangerfield, that time. And so I said, yeah, and Bruce was pretty cool. And
Yeah.
yeah, he took me under his wing, and, I asked him a lot of questions as well. And
Right.
I learned so much. I was fortunate to work with under some really good people, like, Bruce Smith. And then later at Disney, I would work with Mike Surrey, who
Yeah.
did Timon.
Yeah. Another great
Yeah,
animator. Yeah.
yeah.
Wow. So, were you happy with the way Rover Dangerfield turned out?
I was, yeah, I was thrilled. I mean, I think it was technically my first film animating on it. So
Wow.
yeah, I mean, I was happy with it. I thought it was fun. I didn't,
I don't know where
you
I saw it before I think they cut it up.
yeah,
I think I got to
probably.
see it. I think I went to a screening where, well, there's a number in there which is pretty funny, which is I'll never pee on a Christmas tree.
Yeah,
Or I'll never do it on a Christmas tree.
yeah,
Yeah.
uh-huh.
And
Yeah. They didn't say P. They said I'll never do it. That's
I'll
funny.
never do it on a Christmas tree. And
Yeah.
but the whole thing was I don't know, it was a tongue-in-cheek thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 It was a fun one. Yeah, it had a really good. The whole production had a really good spirit about it. It was funnier than hell. Like,
Yeah.
But the nice thing too is, like, where I sat. See, they didn't have room for me where they put the rest of the animators.
Right.
By the time I came on, I got whatever desk was left over, and the only empty desk was back where the I call them the layout guys, but
Mhm.
properly it would be the layout department.
Yes.
And so what happened there was, I would, on my breaks, which would be somewhat often, I would actually go to them and I'd ask them, "What are you guys doing?" Like, because it looked all very technical, like they were there with their rulers and their
Mhm.
stuff like that. And so I would ask them, and they would tell me like what all these numbers meant. See, I was one of those animators that was very curious about, like, the inner workings of stuff. Like I remember getting the layouts and the field guides, and I'd see all these numbers, north, south, east, west, which would relate to, like,
The
the
fields.
the crank numerals, on the I don't know what you call it, the shooting bed or whatever,
The camera bed.
the camera bed,
Yeah.
yeah. And I'd learn how to um, do a layout, oddly enough. And I do remember, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Here's another fun story. I mean, I guess it's I did the scene where they're chasing the turkey around the coop.
Oh, that's a fun.
Yeah.
That was fun.
And the thing about that was that this is before CG. They had the CG opening shot where they're going through the desert,
Mhm.
but that was kind of the limit of CG they had then. They wanted to do a CG chicken coop, but didn't have the budget for it.
Right.
So they had to figure out, like, well, how are you going to make it look like they're running around this coop?
Mhm.
And don't ask me how. I think maybe it was my experience looking at how Don used to lay out
Right.
his boards and stuff, that I got the sensibility of, like, well, this is how you would do it. You would, and believe it or not, I actually did the layout for that. I at least roughed it out. I mean, somebody followed up and actually did the proper drawing,
Mhm.
but I actually figured out the mechanics of it.
Right. Yeah.
And I showed it to the layout. I call them the layout guys. I showed it to the layout department, and they approved it. They were like, you know what, that'll work.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay. So here I was, like at 19, doing layout and key shots for a
Right.
movie, and with barely any experience. I don't know what that was all about, but it happened.
Well, that's it's actually a great thing because you're quizzical about the technical stuff going on, and yeah, all helps you.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Rover Dangerfield, they chopped it. I think they chopped it up for release. Correct?
I think so. It's been a long time. I just remember everything was being chopped up back then. Everything, like
Yeah.
every project I ever worked on, it always seemed like it started with one like aim or one direction, and then once it was like right before release time, some executive would get scared, and then they'd chop it up, or they'd add narration, or they'd do some weird thing that would just totally like it felt like it would just spoil everything we were trying to do.
Yeah.
But then you just moved on to the next thing. You didn't really have time to grieve over it. You just said, well, that's just that. What's next?
Right. So what happened after you finished Rover Dangerfield? That finished up.
So I continued with Hyperion. Again, it was one of those things where Tom Wilhite wanted to keep Hyperion going, but he couldn't keep everybody on board. So
right.
He picked like his 10 best people, and fortunately I was one of them, to my surprise. And so I kind of moved on with Hyperion, and we went on to go make Bebe's Kids.
Yes.
Originally we were supposed to do an animated film with Eddie Murphy. That's what it was for Paramount. It was going to be called Eddie Nine Lives, and it was going to be Eddie Murphy as a cat. And I forgot what the story was. It took place in Louisiana,
right?
Almost like Princess and the Frog.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was supposed to be cat, but then they decided not to do that, and instead they moved forward with Bebe's Kids. So, and then Bruce was going to direct that. So, yeah, we did Bebe's Kids, and then after that, I left to go work on what was going to be a Betty Boop movie for MGM. Yeah, and I went to go work on that, and we got about 3 or 4 months into development, and then MGM had a change in their, whatever, how they usually do, change of leadership or whatever. And as you know,
it's called firing the old management and bring in new management, and then they kill all the projects.
Yeah, they kill all the projects.
Yeah.
Well, get this. So then what happened was that the producer of this Betty Boop movie sent a letter out to Disney Feature Animation and basically told them, because they all knew each other, right?
Right.
It was Jerry Reese, right? Jerry Reese and Paul Leva, and so he knew everybody at Disney. So he sent a memo to Disney, said, "Hey, listen, I assembled this great group. Sadly, I had to let everyone go because of change of management. Would you consider hiring any of these people?" And my name was on the list, and it came across the desk of Chris Buck, who was, my teacher at Cal Arts.
Right.
And I even worked with him a little bit at Hyperion when we did Bebe's Kids. But then he went off to go work on Pocahontas at Disney.
Right.
So he saw my name. He said, "Hey, it's worth calling this guy." And so, I got a call out of the blue, on my answering machine, asking me to send in my reel and my portfolio. And
right.
I did, and they hired me to work on Lion King. They were about halfway through production of Lion King when I joined. So,
what were you doing on Lion King? You were animating?
I was on the Timon unit. Yeah,
wow.
It was kind of fun because back then, it's funny because back then everybody wanted to work on Pocahontas. Lion King was kind of like the
it was the B movie.
Yeah, it was the B movie.
Yeah.
it was the stepping stone to get to Pocahontas. Everybody wanted to do this socially conscious, romantic love story, epic love story, and so they had to work on Lion King. So I said, okay, I'll work on Lion King if I have to.
Right.
Oh my gosh. And so I remember sitting down at the screening room and said, well, here, we're going to screen the film for you in a conference room. And you're going to be working on this character called Timon. And, I'm sitting there in the screening room thinking and it's funny to me because after hearing so much, down talk of, so much shade being thrown on Lion King, I was watching the reels and I was thinking to myself, this is actually quite good.
Yeah.
I don't know what people were complaining about, but this is actually quite good.
Yeah.
And that character in particular was a standout character. I'm like, okay, this is great. The
Jiminy Cricket of that movie. Jiminy Cricket is really the star character in Pinocchio.
Yeah.
So it's the same. It's the same thing here. It's basically, it's Mufasa and all the other characters, the hyenas, whatever. But the standout characters were Timon and Pumbaa.
Yeah, the comedy relief. I mean, they're always the popular ones, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like the genie and
yeah,
all those ones. Yeah, so I had a great experience working on that, and I just remember Mike Surrey is so funny because I did a scene, and I was so ashamed of myself because I should have known better, but my acting sensibility back then was not as deep as it is now, but but Mike called me out on it. He's like, James, when we act our characters, we're not pantomiming every single word. Where it's I see, and then I would have my character point at the eyes,
right.
you were, all this. It was really shallow acting, and I was like, oh, you got me,
Yeah.
And really convinced me okay, think about this twice before drawing. How they say, what is it, measure twice, cut once,
Right.
It's think twice, draw once, I guess.
Did he make you show thumbnails after that, doing thumbnails of the scene and then
no, it wasn't that. It was just calling me out on my acting choices. And so I was like, okay, well, that's fixed. And so from then on, actually everything worked out just fine, and
oh, pretty cool.
Yeah, it was a great experience at Disney at that time. It was really, we were really pushing each other to improve. We were, look at what we were doing. I mean, we were being influenced by all these great illustrators like Hirschfeld and J.C. Leyendecker for Pocahontas, and then
Searle
for Hercules. It was real challenging, but we were up for that challenge, and we teach each other what we discovered, and it was like being at school, it was like an extension of college, if you will.
It's all an extension of college.
Yeah.
I find you just keep learning.
Yeah.
You never stop learning.
Well, that's what I learned. It's you never stop learning, and I still feel like I'm still learning to this day, it's discovering something,
There's always new problems and stuff.
Yeah.
How did it feel when you guys finished up The Lion King, when you actually saw it, when you saw with an audience?
Yeah, it was great. I think what we were really wowed by was the fact that it made, what was it, 100 million within a month of its release.
It was pretty quick.
That was the big thing. That's the thing I kind of remember, and that was oh wow, that. I mean, that was. I know nowadays it doesn't sound like much, but back then,
right
in the early '90s, that was a lot of money.
I heard something. I don't know if it's true or not, but did Disney like you came in one morning and they would have something on your chair, like a bonus, or because I heard there were people who got bonuses on that, and I don't know if that's I remember bonus day. and it was. I just remember people were running through the hallways, screaming. I mean, what the hell? What's going on? And
people were just like a contestant on The Price is Right, and the checks were, being handed out, the bonus checks, and they were quite hefty. And I was like, holy wow.
They're trying to keep you guys happy, I guess,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was also, was that right before when Jeffrey left? When did Jeffrey actually leave?
Didn't he leave
I
right
can't-
before Pocahontas, or
I think so.
that was his
yeah.
baby? But then he I don't know, he got into some spat with.
Yeah, yeah, it was before Pocahontas release because I remember he was still there. I remember sitting in a meeting with him where Jeffrey, he invited all the animators into the conference room, and he sat down at the video cart with the remote that had a
Jog wheel.
jog knob. You could shuttle, you could step forward and back, and that. And he went through the entire film shot by shot, and he explained to the directors how he wanted to see it. It's like, okay, and this part here, the characters should really feel this. This is what the moment should feel like. This, blah blah blah. And it was like, oh wow, like he's really taking charge of this, and it was impressive. It really was. But if I was the director on the show, I'm sure I would feel quite overstepped.
Yeah.
But to everyone else, I mean, I was very clear as an animator what needed to be done
Right.
for the movie. So that's why I was impressed, because I was like, wow, this guy's very articulate in what he wants to see. There was no question at all as to what needed to be done. But then he left, and
was that the next movie after Lion King, Pocahontas, or?
Yeah, it was,
Yeah.
and then there was Hunchback of Notre Dame, so they were both going on at the same time.
Right.
Um,
You didn't work on that though, did you?
No, I didn't. Yeah, because it was literally like A and B teams, and not necessarily meaning the B team was the lesser animator, just that A and B. Like there was two productions literally going on at the exact same time.
Wow, that's crazy.
Like it was so big. Like the department was so big that they were in even separate buildings. And this is before we moved into what they call the Hat Building, which is the animation building. We were in warehouses on Flower Street.
Right. Across from Imagineering.
Yeah, directly across from Imagineering.
Yeah.
And we would walk to buildings to visit each other.
What unit were you on Pocahontas?
I was on, get this, I was on multiple units. I was mostly on Chris's unit, but the problem was that Chris sometimes didn't have enough work for everyone. So I had to work on other characters too. And I think it started out with there was a character, the Ratcliffe. I worked on the villain, Ratcliffe, his butler, and the dog. So those three characters, and they were often in the same scenes together. So lots of times if they were in the same scene, I would just do both characters. So yeah. So I worked with Duncan Marjoribanks for a little bit, and it was great. Like it's just amazing. You, as a young animator, you go over to a supervising animator's desk, and you see the drawing on your desk, and it's one of those things where it's like, I thought I drew well at the time, but as soon as I would go visit my supervising animator, I'd see the drawing on their desk, and I'd be like, hell, I don't know how to draw. I'd be like, I got a lot of learning to do, and I would just,
I don't think it's lack of talent. I just think people do things differently, and it's like you look at somebody and the way they're drawing, and sometimes it's surgical, and it doesn't mean that you're less talented. It just means you approach it differently,
Yeah. Well, like I would see drawings, because everyone had their own application of line, their own, how their drawings actually looked. I mean, Chris drew with what I described to be as like a very heavy hand, very, very like,
almost like a Glenn Keane, I would think, because Glenn
the drawings really look worked over.
Oh, gee.
But then you have Duncan Marjoribanks, who draws with like it's like this like very light feather, like light as a feather, and it was just really interesting just to, yeah, like, wow, and then I had to find my own thing. Like, what do I do? Like,
Right. Yeah, you figure it out. Figure
yeah.
it out.
I remember one of the animators telling me, I won't say who, but I remember they described my drawings as looking like bad cleanups.
Ah,
I know, right? That's how we were to each other, right? It was almost like a big brother, you know, little sister relationship or something where it's like, oh my gosh, it's like, really?
yeah.
Really?
Ribbon each other.
Yeah, totally. Like, I don't care, you know what I mean? Because I
Right.
was doing my thing. I was getting my kudos and,
Right.
I was getting results. It's like, who cares? It's like,
Do you remember what your footage quota was at the time? How?
yeah, it was always 5 feet a week. That was like the magic number. 5 feet a week. That was always the magic thing. And
Right.
it was an average per animator, which means that not everybody had to do 5 feet. It just meant that as an average on the whole,
As a group.
as a group, it would be 5 feet per animator because, you get those animators that would do 10 feet and then the other animators or the animators that would do 8 feet and then the animator that would only do two.
Right.
Well, you average them out and each of them did five. So
Right. Right. Did you try?
yeah,
Did you try to do more than 5?
I tried to do as much as I could.
Yeah.
And a funny, interesting story about that
Hmm.
is get this, right? Okay, I'm just going to say this.
Yeah. Just say it.
So when I was there, I would find that I would have a lot of time on my hands, like like idle time on my hands. Like
Right.
I don't know why. I would have nothing to do. I'd finish my work, and there would be nothing there for me to do. And
Right.
and I was okay on the footage chart. I was maybe like I would land somewhere in the middle,
Right.
kind of a thing.
Mhm.
Well, get this. So when when we came back to do Princess and the Frog,
Yeah.
there was a new accounting process that they wanted to do. And they wanted us, when we filled out our time card, see, back in the day in the 90s, we just filled it out 9/12/16, 9/12/16, 9/12/16.
Right.
It didn't matter. It's just 8 hours a day. Who cares? Just it was almost like a formality at that point.
Right.
No one really kept track of the hours. But
Mhm.
on Princess and the Frog, they wanted you to keep track of like when you came in, how long you took for lunch, which shots you worked on, and how long you worked on for each shot.
Wow.
And they wanted you to keep track of like how long would you be waiting to see the directors, you know? So like if you had finished your shot,
Right.
like say like at 1 o'clock, but director time wasn't until 5,
Hmm.
they wanted you to put down, from 1 until 5, you were waiting. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
Um, and so I did that. I played the game. I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. And on a little post-it note, I would keep little, tabs of, how long I actually worked on shots and how long I hung out at the coffee cart,
Right. Wow.
that kind of thing. And then I would fill it out at the end of the week, and it would show your totals. And what I found out is that on average, I would only work 20 hours per week.
Wow.
And I would experience 20 hours of downtime per
Yeah.
week,
Hmm.
meaning 20 hours of just sitting around, gossiping, doing whatever, you
Right.
see?
Right.
But then they would also calculate that too, because then they would say, well, how much work did you get done in that time? So what was happening was, let's just say I were able to get 5 feet done per week.
Hmm.
That's getting 5 feet done, but only working 20 hours out of the 40,
Right.
as opposed to taking 40 hours to get 5 feet done. You see?
Right. Right.
It's a big difference.
Yeah.
It looks.
Hmm.
And so, like, what I would ultimately find out is based upon my, I don't know what you call it, like my productivity or my speed or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing um, working at a level of like 20 feet per week. That's
Wow.
what I was. That's what I was producing, or that's what I was like capable of producing.
Right.
Like had I worked the entire 40 hours,
Mm-hmm.
would be producing 20 feet a week. You
Wow.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
But because they only gave me a finite amount of work,
Right.
that's all they got. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
they used to catch shots. You know, and I remember sitting around like, other people had shots on their desk, like piling up to get to, and I'm sitting around doing nothing.
Right.
Like, well, why don't I do one of those shots? Well, you can't because you're working on the villain. That's a shot of the frog. You can't draw the frog. You can only draw the villain. Oh yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah, it's silly me, you know what I mean?
That's wacky.
But to be fair,
Yeah.
it did happen where I did get a shot of one of the frogs to do. And the funny thing about it was because I was so used to drawing the villain and the hands, that design crept over onto the frog. So now the frog had these weird looking hands.
Right. Yeah.
So, but that's just an aesthetic. I mean, it didn't have anything to do on the performance. It just meant that, the supervising animator had to go over with me and show me how to draw frog hands as opposed to villain hands,
Right. What was it? Facilitator, right?
What, the character?
What was the name of the character? It was Dr.
Yeah, Dr. Facilier.
Okay. Yes.
The Shadow Man.
Okay.
Yeah,
That was fun. You were working with Bruce Smith on that, I guess.
yeah, that was a funny one.
Yeah.
There's a story on that too. I'm like,
It's great animation on that
Yeah.
character. Yeah.
it really was. I remember I was at DreamWorks at the time,
Mm-hmm.
working on one of their CG movies. It was probably like Flushed Away or something when they made the announcement that they were going to come back and do 2D again.
Yeah.
I remember coming back from lunch and all the guys were like in my office, we were all talking like, "Hey guys, what's going on? Is this an intervention?" And and they told me, they go, "James, you got to sit down." I'm like, "What? What?" It said, "Disney's doing 2D again." Oh, well, I like practically fainted. I was like,
Right.
"Shit, no, wait, really? No." And I found out that Bruce was already hired back there.
Uh-huh.
And so I called up Bruce right away. I was like, "Bruce, we got to have lunch, man." He's like, "Yeah, man, come on over, man." That's my Bruce, right? He's like, "Yeah, man, yeah, man."
Yeah. Bruce is cool. Bruce is
Yeah,
cool.
he's great.
Yeah.
And I went to go visit him, and he was doing some experimental animation on Dr. Facilier, and it was part of the song. And I just remember it had been so long since we had done 2D. Like the last one was Home on the Range, which was like 2003 or something, and this is now like 2007. So
Yeah.
it was like 5 years, and
I really like that movie. What characters did you work on that movie?
Home on the Range.
Yeah. Were you on the cows and?
Here's another story. According to the producer, they said, "James, we want you to work on all of the farm animals that don't talk."
Oh my God. Well.
And I'm like, "Okay, all right, I'll take it." You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But then again, the funny story about that is, stupid is like they decided to give one of the animals one line.
Mm-hmm.
It was the chicken or something like that. And
Mhm.
so here I am going like, again, after animating for, like 10, 15 years, like feeling like I have to prove myself,
Right.
constantly. It's like, okay, I'm going to make the most out of this. I'm going to do this up. I'm just going to do it right. And I animated the scene of the chicken, and we would meet regularly in the conference room to look at each other's shots,
Mm-hmm.
And then they showed my shot, and for some reason, the whole room just burst out laughing. Like it was just the funniest thing. And I'm like, is this a put on? Like, is everyone like you know what I mean? Like, okay, yeah, guys are very funny. It's not that funny, but no, they thought it was really funny.
Right.
And so what that did was that again, it inspired them to say, you know what, maybe we should look at these characters again, and they eventually gave them lines, more
Wow.
lines. So
Wow.
now all of a sudden, before I knew it, like I was doing all the animals, the chicken, the pig, the little piggies,
Mm-hmm.
the rooster, the chicks. And that was crazy because, and I'll say this, it's like the one thing about casting, which is nice, is that you only have to focus on one character. That's the only character you need to do. So you could just go all in and just keep your focus on that.
Sure.
I, on the other hand, my focus was always split. Like this week I do a chicken. Next week I do a pig. The week after that I'm doing what are they? The duck. And they all have different, anatomy and designs. You know what I mean? So
Right.
I would constantly, shifting focus all the time. But it's great because when I look back, like on my career of being challenged in those ways,
Mm-hmm.
it ultimately allows me to do what I do today. And it allows me to feel the confidence that I feel today.
Right.
You see, especially making my own films. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I don't have to worry about um, like I'm only good at comedy animation, or I'm only good, you know what I mean? Because I've done it all. You know what I mean? Like I've had all these different challenges that come across my desk that
Mm-hmm.
were all very different, and yeah, and it kind of it's made me the man I am today. I mean, I don't know.
No,
I don't know how that sounds, but it is. It's
no,
like,
it's when you tackle different things, it just creates more stuff for your toolbox.
mhm.
So now you can, and if you get a new challenge, you'll figure it out because you know how to work it. You
Yeah,
have
exactly.
have all this information, you can kind of figure it out. So you spearheaded a project called Hullabaloo,
Yeah. Mhm.
which is a steampunk style,
Mhm.
and it's amazing.
Oh, thank
The animation of the girls,
you. Mhm.
and the villain, and it has a lot of chase elements to it, like we were talking about earlier.
Car chase.
And
That'd be a car chase. It's like-
and you did not a Quickstarter, you did an Indiegogo.
Yeah, I
Was it
mean, they're
Indiegogo?
both, they're both crowdfunding vehicles, but
Right.
yeah, it's like, yeah, Kickstarter is like the brand name for
Right.
it, but yeah, it was technically Indiegogo.
Right. You raised, was it over $500,000 for the
Not
project?
quite, just short of 500,000. It was like 470.
Yeah, it's still pretty
Change.
impressive,
Yeah. Oh,
And
thanks. Thank you. Yeah.
I've seen
It was a crazy time.
yeah, I saw the first one. I loved it, and
Oh, thank you.
the second. Did you complete them all? I think it was for 3. I think for that
Yeah.
you're going to do 3 of these, right?
I think technically it's 4, even though one of them is like really, really short. Like we just kind of tacked that on. It's like a short little 1-minute thing that's designed to be like, again, another proof of concept for a series of educational videos that I wanted to hopefully produce,
Kind of like Jennifer and Bert Klein's Pups of Liberty.
Yeah,
that kind of thing. I'm stumbling over a lot of words tonight. I don't know. The Pups of Liberty. Exactly. But you worked on that too, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's where, again, like, talking about the challenges, like, I think going through that process, making the film for that, I say making the film for them, but I did all their planning for them. So, and that was really what allowed me to ultimately do my own film, because by that time I knew how to make a film. I knew how to lay it out. I knew how to plan it. I knew how to do all of the setup and everything. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so way making Hullabaloo was just like, it was just a further exercise in making a film. But yeah, I mean, we had to figure that out, how to do it back then. And, it was one of those things again where it's like, it's like, what did I do? I started out um, doing their workbook, which means, translating the storyboards into workable shots for the animators to get started on.
Right.
Because there's an interpretation that needs to be done, and some planning, like, is this going to have a camera move or is it not? And if it is, what exact angle is it going to be? And all this stuff like that. So I really had to set up the work for all of the animators to do. And it started off with like, well, let me just do this real quick blocks for buildings, like, and a grid to indicate the ground or something.
Right.
To all of a sudden taking those primary drawings and then putting detail on them, then, cleaning up the layout, even doing cleanup layout where I found myself, experimenting, trying to learn pen and ink illustration style, so I would like look at books with pen and ink illustrations and study them and try and break down like what is it that makes pen and ink, gives it its charm, its stuff, how do they do shading, oh, look at that, it's cross hatching, okay, they do cross hatching, okay, good to know, oh, all this stuff. And then I'm drawing on vellum paper and I'm calculating, I'm using field guides, I'm like it was crazy, and it was a wonderful experience, but it was crazy. I mean, I'm like, and again, when Princess and the Frog came back into production, by that time, because I had done so much layout work for that short film, I approached the director saying, "Hey, I want to come back in the layout department." And they were like, "What?" Because I loved layout so much. I loved planning. I loved setting up this stuff. I just really liked doing that.
Yeah.
And they were like, "Well, okay, but we really think you should be an animator." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know, but okay, we'll do it this once." And they were nice with it. But if you ever want to be an animator, we'll welcome you back. And they're like, "Okay." So I worked in the layout department, but I didn't really get a chance to really do what I really wanted to do. They accepted me because the Pixar, what is it? The merger was pretty new, and now Lasseter was going to be overseeing both animation studios at that time.
Right.
And so Lasseter wanted to see very elaborate animatics, very much like the animatics he was used to seeing, from Brad Bird's films, like The Incredibles and stuff, where you had like, the characters moving, all over and stuff. And so what they really needed was somebody in the layout department who could actually draw characters, because, the layout people were kind of known or notorious. No, not notorious. They were notorious for not being able to draw characters. They were great at drawing, buildings and fences and all that stuff like that. When it came to characters, they would just fall flat.
Right.
So I went in and I did that for them. I did the character poses. But then again, it very quickly was like, well, then the animators would just throw it away. You know what I mean? Like they would disregard it. It really felt like, well, what am I doing? I'm just doing this to appease an executive, essentially. And so I saw what was going on with Bruce's unit on the villain song, and I said, I really like what's going on there, and so I go to Bruce. I say, "Hey, Bruce, if I were to ditch layout, would you have me on your unit?"
Right.
And Bruce was like ecstatic. He was like, "Yes." He was like, "Yes, go now, go." I think so and so's in their office. It was great. So this was the production. I think they're in their office right now. Go right in there. Tell them you want to be an animator right now. Here, I got a shot for you right now. And I'm like, whoa, wait, whoa. Okay, all right, okay.
Moving really quick.
Yeah, he was like, he was in kind of a pickle on that thing. He really, I don't know. Things were, we had a rough start on that show with animators kind of getting back into the groove again. You know what I mean? After not doing it for like 5 years, a lot of people got rusty, I think, and but I hadn't, because I'd been doing it, on small little projects. So I was ready to jump right back in. But
sure.
So Bruce saw that and he was like, "Yeah, man." He's like, "Yeah, I got a scene for you right now." I was like, "Okay, let's do this." Woo!
Yeah.
And back I was into the fray, and it was great. It was a crazy time. Just crazy times.
Very crazy time.
Very, very character building for sure. Like,
we were talking earlier. We're gonna wrap this up. I hope you come back and do this again, and we can talk about some of the, because we didn't talk about a lot of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that would be great.
I consider you a master talent. You worked on Hercules, and you worked on I believe Emperor's New Groove, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and we're gonna come back and talk about that. We'll give it a break for a couple of months, and then we'll come back.
Yeah, there's some good stories to tell there, And I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, cool. One thing I want to bring up is that America Sings thing that you're working on, I thought was really. We were talking about this before we went on and started doing this podcast thing. So you took the soundtrack to Disneyland's America Sings and kind of took it as a soundtrack, and with all the artwork that was produced and the, I guess the figures that were produced, the character designs and all that, and you started animating it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain that to the audience here, like how that came about?
Yeah,
it's an interesting story, and I want to kind of leave off with that. And then,
sure.
Yeah.
I'll try and keep this kind of short, I guess. Like, not going all the way back, but it's an interesting one.
Yeah.
It really goes back all the way to my childhood. Back in 1977, when they created the attraction for the bicentennial of the United States, they released an album, and my parents bought it for me. I wanted it. I loved the attraction.
Right.
And I got the album. And so I would listen to records as a kid. I would listen to mostly like story records, like the kind of thing where the Disneyland records, where it said like, you'll know it's time to turn the page when Tinkerbell goes like this, bling,
Right.
And then you turn the page, and it was Disneyland records. They had a bunch of them, like little 45s.
Right.
But this was a full album.
And this was the actual soundtrack from the attraction.
It was the actual soundtrack. Like, it's unbelievable that they would release something like that, but they did.
Right. Yeah.
And so I would just sit there and listen to it, and I would look at the booklet, which had all of a lot of Mark Davis's concept art. I didn't know that that's what it was. It was just really neat illustrations to me.
Yeah.
It was actually concept art.
Right.
Which I thought was brilliant in hindsight. Like, wow, look at that. Concept art can be children's book. Anyways, so I fell in love at that moment, and I kind of say that it kind of conditioned me to be an animator, because we, before we had modern technology, we would always work off of a soundtrack, but we would be given a tape cassette, and all of us had like a little tape recorder at our desk, and we'd pop it in and we'd listen to it, and we would try and get our inspiration for our acting based off of the voice on the tape cassette.
Right.
So this was no different, except it was a voice off of an LP, a record, a vinyl record. And so I always had this vision in my head of this animated version of it, because the animatronics were good for their day, but they weren't fully articulated.
Right.
You know what I mean? The voices were so rich. they weren't fully articulated in the animatronics, but they were so rich that I saw a performance beyond that,
Right.
you know?
Hmm.
And so it was like this itch that I could not help but scratch. And so, like, I think like around, I want to say during the Home on the Range production, I kind of figured out like, well, with the animation software they gave us that we could actually, I could make like a little mini story reel, if you will. Like I could,
Right.
I could import the audio and instead of like animation drawings, I would just use storyboard drawings, except they'd be timed out
Hmm.
really long. So instead of holding a drawing for 2 or 4 frames, I'd hold it for 47 frames.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like I would make a story reel with this animation software. And so I tested it out with sequence one, the opening,
Hmm.
and convinced myself to say, like, you know what, this could work.
Yeah.
This could be something, and I animated a little shot of Eagle Sam or whatever,
Yeah.
and I cut it in. I said, yeah, this can definitely be there's something here
Yeah.
for
Some
sure.
wonderful animation.
Yeah.
Wonderful animation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it looks like milk call work out of Robin Hood.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Really, really
Oh,
nice. Really nice.
Oh, that's thank you. Thank you so much. That's a real compliment. I appreciate that. And that was my target. That's what I was trying to do, is kind of mimic that Xerox era of Disney, particularly Robin Hood. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Even with the rough drawing, with even to show some of the construction lines, like the center line and the eye line and stuff like that. You know?
Yeah.
Um, I really liked that. I really liked that aesthetic, even though it's my understanding that Disney didn't. I think, and he even wanted to close down the animation department
Oh,
if he
gee.
thought that that's what it was going to be. And
Yeah.
was it Ken Anderson who kind of came up with that process? He was like feeling really down. I could see why.
Well, he
Like,
was.
oh my God.
Walt handed his head to him, and then
Yeah.
it was. He thought Ken Anderson was an amazing talent, but he was very, very fearful that he was going to lose his job.
Yeah.
And I don't know where that came from, because he was probably the most valued person on that team, because he
Yeah.
was doing design, he's doing storyboards, doing a lot of different things.
Right.
Could even animate if he wanted to.
Yeah, he
And,
was brilliant. Yeah.
Brilliant. And I think this was around 101 Dalmatians, and I don't think Walt had seen it. I think he just saw it in like rough animation and storyboards and stuff like that. But then when he finally saw what they were doing with the design of the layouts, where they're basically Xeroxing the layout line and then painting the backgrounds and putting the cell on top of that, of the Xerox line, I guess Disney felt it took it back like 40 years to like Steamboat Willie, 30 years, sorry.
Yeah.
And so anyway, Walt had a conniption fit. Whatever. I don't even know what a conniption fit is. It's just
I don't know. I don't know. I just remember that because I was watching one of those what is it, Disney Legend videos, and Ken was he was going on about it, and I thought it had a nice story, because at the end of it, I think he said that the last thing that Walt told him was something to the effect that made Ken feel as though that he actually did a good job. You know what I mean? That kind of brought it, and that was really nice. I thought that was really good. But
right,
I mean, he introduced like a wonderful aesthetic. It has such a charm about it, that Xerox era.
Yeah,
and
I love it.
And you actually get to see the actual animator's drawings. It's it doesn't go through the cleanup filter. And I thought, for this America Sings thing, I thought, well, it kind of goes hand in hand with the fact that, it was actually produced in, 77, which is the height of that. So if it were to have been made into a production, they would have made it look exactly like that. And that's how I wanted it to be, and
it definitely looks like that. And it's, I can't wait for you to finish it.
I hope I
got-
live long enough to finish it. I guess.
What
It's
you,
a,
what
like
you
I
got?
said, like it's
What do you
like
got? Two sequences? You have two sequences, right?
Well, I actually the entire thing is storyboarded. Actually, I storyboarded the entire show.
Wow.
And it's about 22 minutes long.
Mhm.
And in each sequence, if you will, time period that they go through, I probably have at least I don't know, like at least 3 or 4 shots animated in each,
Wow.
and some of them are actually in color.
Yeah, I saw that. The colors are great.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. Well,
It's a restoration project. It's like I consider it like my Chevy on blocks. It's like that's just sitting in the garage. It's like I work on it a little bit every weekend or something. Just to.
It's pretty. No, it's pretty cool. It's on Vimeo, right?
Yeah. I think I have those up on Vimeo. I may have stuff on YouTube. I have my own YouTube channel.
Yeah.
So my plan is what I want to do this year
Mhm.
is I want to edit everything together
Right.
properly and put it on my YouTube channel and so everyone can see the entire storyboarded film with all of the animation
Right.
in its current state, and then kind of make it like an annual thing where like every July 4th or whatever, because I kind of work on it sporadically throughout the year.
Right.
Every July 4th, I'll put an update on it that'll have more animation. So it'll have even more next time and people can follow along, and it'll be a thing like a Christmas special, but it'll be a July 4th special.
Well, we need a July 4th special.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks.
Yeah. So check out James' YouTube channel.
Yeah, James Lopez Animation on YouTube.
There you go. And anything to add? What are you working on now? You working on anything?
Well, some exciting things now is, I'm starting to do online mentorships now. So I'm working with 2 groups. I'm working with CTN.
Mm-hmm.
They have a foundation for learning, and so what they're setting up is a process, a system for professionals to teach one-on-one. And I'm also partnering up with my brother-in-law, who, well, actually, it's the brother to my brother-in-law. Weird story.
Mm-hmm.
It just so happens he's an animator as well. He worked for Rich Entertainment, like on Swan Princess and stuff. And
oh, wow.
now he's moved on into CG and working on a lot of the Marvel movies.
Right.
That kind of stuff. But
cool.
We're kind of partnering up to create like our own kind of like it's not a school, it's a mentoring program. So it's
Right.
one-on-one. And he's going to primarily do the CG side of things, and I'm primarily going to take care of any 2D or hand-drawn, kind of thing. So between the two of us, we're making it happen, I guess.
Well, that's very cool. It's very cool.
Yeah.
James, thank you for coming on here and telling your story and chatting about 2D animation.
Yeah, my pleasure. No, this is fun, and I'll be happy to do it again anytime you want.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Do you have any questions or comments about the podcast? Please email Brian at cartoonerific.com. Your email may be featured in one of our future shows.
Wasn't that a wonderful interview? Thank you, Mr. James Lopez. Thank you for coming on the show. I enjoyed it. I hope you did too. It was a wonderful, wonderful interview. And anyway, maybe we'll have James back in the future to talk about some other stuff. Anyway, stay tuned. Well, in case you're not aware, we do have a Facebook page. We're also on Twitter. But the Facebook page is the Cartoonerific Classic Animated Cartoon Podcast page. And from time to time, we will put on there cartoons that you may never have seen or interviews with some animators from the past, a whole bunch of different things, pencil tests and stuff like that, neat stuff. So please check that out and please join there and let your friends know about us. And more importantly, If you see a post by us about a particular podcast and you happen to really like it, please leave some comments and share it to a friend or share it to your group of friends. That would help us out tremendously. Now, we have the Cartoonerific News, which is on every Tuesday night. Marjorie does that. It's been actually pretty popular. People have been listening to it, so we're going to continue to do that. And it's only about anywhere between 3 to 5 minutes on a Tuesday night, but it kind of keeps you abreast of what's going on in the animation world. And also, we announce our next week's guest on there. So you can go to that on Tuesday night around 9-10 p.m. Eastern Time, and you will learn our guest for Friday night's podcast. Anyway, one other thing that I need to tell you is we want this podcast to grow, and so it's very important for you to go out and let your friends know outside of Facebook. You know, if you really enjoy the show, let others know about us. It's so important. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe. There's this podcast is available on many, many different services, and it's available on YouTube Music, and you can subscribe there, or any one of your favorites, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, all these different places where you can get the Cartoonerific podcast. So please do that. Anyway, it's Memorial Day weekend here in the States. And I just want you, if you're listening to this on Memorial Day weekend, please have a safe and wonderful one with your family and or your loved ones. And we will be back next Friday for another wonderful Cartoonerific Classic Animated Cartoons podcast. So anyway, everybody have a good one, and we'll see you then. Take care.
This has been a Cartoonerific Studios presentation.
The Cartoonerific podcast is copyright 2024 by Cartoonerific Studios Incorporated. All rights reserved.